I never expected a simple neighborhood dispute to lead me down a rabbit hole of financial fraud, deception, and ultimately, justice. But that's exactly what happened in Oakridge Estates, our quiet suburban community in Naperville, Illinois. My name is Adam Patterson, and I moved to Oakridge Estates with my wife 7 years ago. We were drawn to the manicured lawns, community pool, and the promise of a well-maintained neighborhood. Little did I know that our picture-perfect community was being systematically robbed from the inside. It all started with a fence. Not just any fence, my fence. A 6-foot cedar privacy fence that I'd installed around our backyard. According to Diane Morgan, the president of our homeowner association, my fence violated community guidelines by being 2 inches taller than regulations allowed. I still remember that first confrontation. Diane stood on my doorstep, clipboard in hand, her highlighted blonde bob perfectly styled despite the summer humidity. She wore what I'd come to recognize as her unofficial uniform, pressed khaki pants and a pastel polo shirt with the Oakridge Estates logo embroidered on the chest. "Mr. Patterson," she said, tight-lipped smile not reaching her eyes, "your fence is out of compliance. 6 feet is the maximum allowable height, and according to my measurements, yours is 6 feet and 2 inches. I tried reasoning with her. The fence came in standard panels. The ground isn't perfectly level, so some sections might appear slightly taller. Her smile remained fixed. "Rules are rules, Mr. Patterson. You'll need to modify the fence or face a fine of $100 per week until it's corrected." That was my introduction to Diane Morgan, HOA tyrant extraordinaire. What I didn't know then was that Diane wasn't just being difficult, she was distracting from her own far more significant violations. I paid a contractor $800 to modify my fence. It seemed easier than fighting the HOA. But that initial encounter sparked my curiosity about our association's leadership. I began attending monthly HOA meetings, usually held in the community center adjacent to our neighborhood pool. The meetings were typically dull affairs. Diane would preside over discussions about landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, and the ever-present topic of rule violations. Board members Benjamin Harrison, Tricia Wilkins, and Frank Gonzalez would nod along with most of Diane's recommendations. Only Margaret Edwards, our treasurer, occasionally questioned decisions, though she was usually overruled. What struck me most was how casual they were about spending. When our sprinkler system needed repairs, Diane immediately approved $15,000 for a contractor I'd never heard of. When the clubhouse needed new furniture, she authorized $23,000 without getting competitive bids. Everything was presented as urgent and necessary. "The community's appearance is our priority," she'd say whenever questions arose. "Property values depend on maintaining our standards." It wasn't until I befriended Margaret after a particularly contentious meeting about raising our annual dues that I learned she had concerns. "I don't have access to all the accounts," Margaret confided over coffee at my kitchen table. "Diane insists on handling the reserve fund and the capital improvements account personally. She only gives me statements for the operating budget." Margaret, a retired accountant with silver hair and sharp eyes, seemed genuinely troubled. "I've asked to see the complete financials, but she always has an excuse. The last time I pushed, she suggested maybe I wasn't up to the job anymore." That conversation planted the first real seed of suspicion in my mind. Why would the HOA president prevent the treasurer from accessing all financial accounts? I began to pay closer attention to our community's improvements, or lack thereof. Despite approving significant expenditures for landscaping, many common areas looked neglected. The tennis courts, supposedly resurfaced the previous year at a cost of $45,000, showed the same cracks and where they'd had for years. My suspicions grew when I reviewed our annual HOA budget statement. The numbers seemed vague, with large sums allocated to miscellaneous expenses and professional services without detailed breakdowns. The turning point came when I received a notice of a special assessment. Each homeowner was being charged an additional $1,500 for critical infrastructure repairs that couldn't be covered by our regular dues. This was the third special assessment in 5 years. I decided to dig deeper. Using my background in finance, I work as a financial analyst for a corporate consulting firm. I requested copies of all HOA financial documents for the past 5 years. I cited state laws that required the association to provide these records to homeowners upon request. Diane stonewalled me. First came delays the documents were being organized or with the accountant. Then came the fees $150 for administrative costs to fulfill my request. Finally came the incomplete records bank statements with redacted information and missing months. "This is all we're required to provide," Diane told me coldly when I complained about the gaps. "If you continue harassing the board with these requests, we'll have to consider it a hostile action against the community." I wasn't the only one with concerns. Other neighbors had begun to question the constant increases in dues alongside deteriorating amenities. Robert Jenkins, who lived across the street from me, had been tracking the discrepancies between announced improvements and actual work completed. "They claimed they spent $30,000 on new pool equipment last summer," Robert told me one evening while we walked our dogs. "But all they did was replace one pump and repaint the deck chairs. I've worked in construction for 20 years. That job couldn't have cost more than $5,000. We formed an informal neighborhood watchdog group. 6 of us started meeting weekly, comparing notes and gathering evidence. Eliza Torres, a paralegal, researched our legal options. Michael Chen, who taught accounting at the local community college, helped analyze the partial financial records we'd obtained. Our breakthrough came unexpectedly. Margaret Edwards, the HOA treasurer, suffered a stroke and was hospitalized. During her absence, the board appointed Tricia Wilkins as interim treasurer. Tricia, overwhelmed by the sudden responsibility and lacking Margaret's financial background, inadvertently gave me access to files Margaret had saved but never shared. What I found was shocking. Buried in those files were copies of checks made out to DME Consulting, a company I'd never heard of despite its apparent receipt of nearly $15,000 per month for management services. A quick search revealed DME Consulting was registered to Deanne M. Evans, Diane Morgan's maiden name. She had been paying herself consulting fees in addition to managing our HOA, but that was just the beginning. With this evidence, we approached the remaining board members individually, away from Diane's influence. Frank Gonzalez was horrified by our discoveries and agreed to help us access the complete financial records. "I never saw the actual invoices," he admitted, shame evident in his voice. "Diane would just present summaries at our meetings and we'd vote on them. I trusted her." With Frank's help and his board access credentials, we obtained 7 years of bank statements, invoices, and payment records. What they revealed was staggering. Diane had created an elaborate scheme of fake vendors, inflated invoices, and unauthorized transfers. Oakridge Landscaping Services, which received $8,000 monthly for maintenance, was registered to her brother-in-law but did minimal work, subcontracting the actual maintenance to a budget service. Premier Pool Management charged us premium rates, but was actually a shell company with Diane as the sole proprietor. Most egregious were the capital improvement projects that never happened. A $120,000 clubhouse renovation resulted in nothing more than new paint and carpet. The remaining funds were diverted through a series of transfers to accounts we couldn't initially trace. Armed with this information, we called an emergency community meeting. Over 200 homeowners packed into our community center on a Tuesday evening in April. The atmosphere was tense as I presented our findings, complete with copies of fraudulent invoices, bank statements, and corporate registrations connecting Diane to the fake companies. Diane didn't attend. When board member Benjamin Harrison called her, she claimed to be out of town on family business. We later discovered she had emptied her personal accounts and was attempting to flee to Mexico. We voted unanimously to remove the entire board, establish an interim leadership committee, and pursue full financial and criminal investigations. We also froze all HOA accounts to prevent further theft. The next morning, I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the State Attorney General's office. Given the amount stolen, our preliminary estimate was over $500,000 and the duration of the fraud, this qualified as significant white-collar crime. Special Agent Rachel Torres was assigned to our case. A serious woman with methodical habits, she spent weeks combing through our financial records and interviewing board members and contractors. "This is unfortunately more common than you might think," she told me during one of our many meetings. HOAs handle large sums of money with minimal oversight. It's fertile ground for fraud. The forensic audit ordered by the FBI revealed the full extent of Diane's scheme. Over 7 years, she had systematically embezzled $892,745 from our community through fake vendors, phantom projects, inflated invoices, and direct theft from our reserve fund. She had maintained her facade by completing just enough visible projects to avoid suspicion while intimidating anyone who asked questions. The most disturbing discovery was how she had manipulated Margaret Edwards, our treasurer. We found emails where Diane had threatened to expose Margaret's son's past drug conviction if she didn't cooperate in limiting financial transparency. Margaret's stroke had likely been triggered by the stress of this ongoing coercion. 4 months after our initial discovery, federal agents arrested Diane Morgan at her sister's home in San Diego. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and extortion. The case made headlines in both local papers and national news outlets covering white-collar crime. HOA president looted nearly $900K from community. Read the Chicago Tribune's front-page story. The aftermath was challenging for our community. We had to increase dues temporarily to rebuild our depleted reserve fund. Many improvements that homeowners thought had been completed needed to be addressed properly. The pool required significant repairs that had been neglected despite Diane's claims of regular maintenance. Our insurance covered only a portion of the losses since the fraud had continued for so long without detection. I reluctantly agreed to serve as interim HOA president while we reorganized. My first actions included implementing strict financial controls, requiring multiple approvals for all expenditures, hiring a legitimate property management company with proper credentials, and establishing a transparent system where all homeowners could view financial statements online. Diane's trial began 11 months after her arrest. I attended every day, often accompanied by other Oakridge residents. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Bank records showed she had used our money to purchase a vacation condo in Florida, take luxury cruises, and amass a collection of designer handbags valued at over $200,000. Her defense attorney attempted to portray her as an overworked volunteer who had made accounting errors rather than committed deliberate fraud. This strategy collapsed when prosecutors presented emails where she explicitly discussed hiding expenditures and creating fake invoices. The most damning testimony came from her former assistant, Jennifer Williams, who had helped create fraudulent documentation in exchange for a percentage of the stolen funds. Jennifer had accepted a plea deal in exchange for her cooperation. Diane would tell me which vendors to create invoices for and what amounts to bill, Jennifer testified. She said the homeowners were too stupid to notice and that they deserved it for being so demanding. After a 3-week trial, the jury deliberated for just 6 hours before finding Diane guilty on all counts. At the sentencing hearing, the judge was unsparing in his assessment. "You betrayed the trust of hundreds of families," he told her. "You stole not just their money, but their sense of security in their own community. Your actions were calculated, continuous, and contemptuous of both your neighbors and the law." He sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison, ordered full restitution of the stolen funds, and imposed additional fines. As a non-violent offender, she would serve her time at a minimum security facility in Kentucky, but with her assets seized and financial future destroyed. As Diane was led away in handcuffs, I felt no satisfaction, only relief that our community could finally begin healing. Recovery was a slow process. Beyond the financial damage, Diane's betrayal had fractured the trust within our neighborhood. People who had served on committees with her questioned their own judgment. Residents who had supported her leadership felt foolish and angry. We held community meetings focused on rebuilding. A professional mediator helped facilitate discussions about governance, transparency, and moving forward. Slowly, the atmosphere improved as new volunteers stepped up to serve on committees and neighbors worked together on community projects. 1 year after Diane's conviction, we inaugurated our new board, a diverse group of homeowners committed to ethical management. Our new president, Elena Rodriguez, a corporate ethics officer, established a whistleblower policy and mandatory annual audits by an independent firm. The experience transformed our community in unexpected ways. What had once been a neighborhood of cordial but distant relationships became more tightly knit. Shared adversity had forged stronger bonds. I remained involved but stepped back from leadership to focus on my family and career. The whole ordeal had consumed nearly 2 years of my life. My wife joked that she had almost forgotten what I looked like without a spreadsheet in front of me. 3 years later, I still receive occasional updates from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Through asset seizures and garnishment of her husband's pension, he had filed for divorce after her arrest, claiming ignorance of her crimes. About $420,000 has been recovered and returned to our HOA. The remainder may never be fully repaid. The most satisfying development came when our case inspired state legislation requiring greater financial transparency for homeowner associations, including mandatory external audits for communities with budgets exceeding $500,000. Known informally as the Oakridge Act, it has already prevented similar frauds in other communities. Recently, I bumped into Margaret Edwards at our community farmers market. Recovered from her stroke but moving more slowly with a cane, she stopped to chat. "I should have spoken up sooner," she said quietly. "I was scared, but that's no excuse. You were being blackmailed," I reminded her, "and eventually you did help us. That took courage." She smiled sadly. "I've learned it's easier to find courage at the beginning of a problem than after it's grown into a monster." Her words stayed with me. In many ways, they captured the lesson our entire community had learned through this ordeal. Small concerns left unaddressed can grow into catastrophic problems. Complacency and fear are the allies of corruption. Last month, I received a letter from Diane. I almost threw it away unopened, but decided to read it. She expressed remorse, claimed she had initially only borrowed from the accounts intending to repay them, and described how the deception had snowballed beyond her control. She asked for forgiveness. I didn't respond. Some betrayals are too profound for simple forgiveness. But I did share the letter with our current board as part of our ongoing commitment to transparency. Today, Oakridge Estates looks much like it did when I first moved here, perhaps even better. Our amenities are properly maintained, our common areas beautifully landscaped. Property values have recovered and even increased slightly above the market rate. The difference lies beneath the surface. Our community newsletter now includes quarterly financial summaries. Board meetings are recorded and streamed for those who can't attend in person. Contracts above $5,000 require competitive bidding and are posted publicly before approval. The locked cabinets and whispered decisions of Diane's era have been replaced with open books and public discussions. I sometimes wonder how things might have been different if I had questioned that first fence violation more thoroughly. If I had attended meetings from the beginning rather than assuming others were handling things properly. If any of us had looked beyond our individual concerns to the collective health of our community. The forensic auditors who examined our case identified what they called red flags that should have alerted us earlier. The lack of competitive bids, the vague financial reports, the resistance to questions, the discrepancy between expenditures and visible improvements. These warnings were present for years before we noticed them. I've spoken at several HOA conferences about our experience, sharing the warning signs and preventive measures we've implemented. The story resonates because it touches on universal themes: trust, responsibility, and the balance between individual and community interests. Last summer, we installed a new fence around our community pool, one that met all safety codes while complementing the landscape design. 3 different contractors bid on the project. The specifications, bids, and final contract were all posted on our community website. The work was completed on time and under budget, with the savings allocated to our reserve fund. It was a small project, unremarkable in most ways. But as I watched the installation from the pool deck, I felt profound satisfaction. This was how things should work: transparent, efficient, honest. The system we had rebuilt was functioning as intended. That evening, neighbors gathered for our annual summer picnic. Children played on the newly installed playground equipment while adults grilled burgers and shared dishes. Conversation flowed easily among people who had weathered a crisis together and emerged stronger. Frank Gonzalez, who had remained on our board through the transition, sat down beside me with a plate of food. "You know what I realized recently," he said, watching the community around us. "Before all this happened, I knew maybe 20 people in this neighborhood by name. Now I know over 100, I nodded. "Silver linings, I guess." "More than that," Frank replied. "I think communities are supposed to be connected. We were just neighbors before, now we're actually a neighborhood." His distinction captured something essential about our journey. The crisis had forced us to engage with one another, to recognize our shared responsibility for our collective home. The indifference that had allowed Diane's fraud to flourish had been replaced by active citizenship. 6 years have passed since I first questioned those financial discrepancies. Diane Morgan remains in federal prison, serving her 15-year sentence. According to her last progress report, she has completed a degree in business ethics through a prison education program, an irony not lost on anyone familiar with her case. Our community has implemented a term limit policy for board members and established a routine rotation of accounting firms to prevent any single person or entity from gaining too much unsupervised control. These practices have become models for other HOAs in our region. The fence that started my journey of discovery was replaced last year when we remodeled our backyard. The new one stands exactly 6 feet tall, measured carefully from multiple points to ensure compliance. I no longer see it as a symbol of petty tyranny, but rather as a reminder of the importance of rules applied fairly and transparently. On the anniversary of Diane's conviction, our community holds what we call Transparency Day, an open house where residents can review financial records, inspect ongoing projects, and discuss future plans with board members and contractors. It's not a celebration of her downfall, but a recommitment to the principles her actions violated. Last year's event included a workshop on financial literacy for homeowners, teaching them how to read HOA financial statements and identify potential irregularities. The session was packed, with residents asking thoughtful questions about reserve studies, capital improvement planning, and fiduciary responsibility. Margaret Edwards attended, sitting quietly in the back but nodding approvingly throughout the presentation. Afterward, she approached me with tears in her eyes. "This is redemption," she said simply, "not just for me, but for all of us who didn't see what was happening." I've often reflected on how easily Diane's fraud might have continued undetected. If Margaret hadn't shared her concerns, if Robert hadn't tracked those discrepancies, if Eliza hadn't researched our legal options, if Michael hadn't analyzed the financial records, each person played an essential role in uncovering the truth. The lesson is clear. Community oversight requires community involvement. Apathy is the accomplice of corruption. This understanding has spread beyond our HOA matters. Many Oakridge residents have become more engaged in local government, attending city council meetings and participating in community planning initiatives. Several have run for local office, bringing their heightened awareness of financial accountability to school boards and planning commissions. The ripple effects continue. 3 neighboring HOAs have adopted our financial transparency policies. A state representative who lives in our community has introduced legislation strengthening penalties for HOA fraud and expanding homeowner rights to financial information. Sometimes the smallest actions trigger the most significant changes. My dispute over 2 inches of fence height led to the discovery of nearly $900,000 in fraud, a 15-year federal prison sentence, and the transformation of an entire community's governance structure. I still have the original citation Diane issued about my fence. I keep it framed in my home office as a reminder that questioning authority isn't just a right, sometimes it's a responsibility. That seemingly minor disputes can reveal major issues when examined closely. That systems work only when people are paying attention. Last week, I received a call from Special Agent Torres. She wanted to let me know that the FBI had used our case study in their training program for agents investigating white-collar crime. "Your community's experience is saving others from similar situations," she told me. "That's something to be proud of." I shared this news at our monthly board meeting, which now averages 60 attendees rather than the 6 or 7 who would show up during Diane's tenure. The room applauded, not out of pride but out of a sense that our painful experience was creating positive change beyond our neighborhood. As I look around Oakridge Estates today, I see more than just well-maintained homes and amenities. I see a community that has learned the hard way about the importance of involvement, transparency, and accountability. I see neighbors who recognize that shared governance requires shared vigilance. The fence that once divided us has become the story that unites us, a reminder that in communities, as in life, what affects one affects all. And that justice, while sometimes delayed, is worth pursuing regardless of how tall the obstacles may appear. Every time I drive past our community entrance sign, I think about how appearances can be deceiving. Behind our manicured lawns and coordinated house colors was a criminal enterprise operating in plain sight. Now, behind those same pleasant facades is something authentic, a true community built on hard-earned wisdom and mutual respect. We've replaced the sign that Diane had commissioned at an inflated cost of $15,000 with a simpler one created by a local artisan for 1/3 the price. The old sign was ornate and imposing. The new one is elegant in its simplicity, welcoming rather than intimidating. It's a fitting metaphor for our transformation from appearance-focused to substance-centered, from rule-bound to principle-guided. We still have rules, of course. Communities need shared standards, but they're applied with transparency, consistency, and common sense. Diane's legacy isn't just the financial damage she caused, but also the resilience she unwittingly inspired. Like an immune system strengthened after fighting disease, our community governance is now more robust, more alert to potential threats, more capable of self-correction. As I finish writing this account of our experience, I'm aware that the story isn't truly over. We continue to recover funds, implement safeguards, rebuild trust. The effects of Diane's actions will ripple through our community for years to come, but I'm equally aware that we're no longer defined by her betrayal. We've written a new chapter together, one about accountability, engagement, and the power of collective action. One where the villain doesn't get the last word. That's the true measure of justice, not just punishment for wrongdoing but restoration of what was damaged. Not just learning from mistakes but creating systems that prevent their recurrence. 7 years ago, I fought over 2 inches of fence height. Today, I understand that what matters isn't the height of our fences but the strength of the community they surround.